Welcome, everybody. My name's Jessica Gardner, and I'm going to give a proper introduction in a few moments. We're just going to let everyone come in. We've got hundreds booked in for this event. It's absolutely fabulous. So just bear with me while everyone clicks on, gets into the room with us, so we can all have a good time around the aerial photographs. I just wish we could all be in Selwyn together. I know that's my wish and yours as well. The great thing, of course, is that we can sort of be together from around the world, which you can't do in normal times. So we've got numbers shooting up coming in, just a few more seconds, and then I'll do a formal start. There's such a benefit, isn't there, to some of these digital opportunities, which do mean we can sort of speak around the world, despite the fact that we all wish we could be together. Okay, just give it a couple more seconds, and then we will kick off. Oh, still numbers, lots of numbers still coming in. So just bear with me. Everyone's probably just getting the gin and tonic before they settle down to enjoy the aerial photographic event we've got. Okay, those numbers look absolutely fantastic. Let's do a proper start. Hello, everyone, and welcome to a very special event. This is before Google Earth, and it's fascinating, and I hope you enjoy it as much as I do. We're celebrating tonight the work and legacy of Professor J.K.S. St. Joseph, of course, of Selwyn, and the creation of the Cambridge University Collection of Aerial Photography. I'm your host for this event. My name is Dr. Jessica Gardner, and I am very proud to be a Fellow of Selwyn. And I'm also very proud to be the University Librarian for Cambridge, and both matter here. Of course, Professor St. Joseph, a Cambridge member, and a Selwyn member, and the collection is hosted on the digital library for the University Library. We'll hear more about that in the talk. It's wonderful to have so many from around the world joining us for this event. So many friends, so many alumni, hundreds of you joining us. And I know that also includes members of Professor St. Joseph's family. So a huge welcome to everyone and a special welcome to those family members too. It's wonderful to be here together. Now we've got 4 speakers and they're going to speak for about 35 minutes or so. And then should have plenty of time for questions and answers. Now, I know many of you are more than familiar with Zoom now. So just a reminder, please use the chat function, which should be at the bottom of your screen, to queue in any questions, and I'll be picking them up through the talk, ready to put as many as possible in the time we've got to our speakers. And I think that they very kindly said that if we don't get through all of those, we'll find a way to kind of come back with some further information. So, we'd love to do that as well. You can't see the chat, I think, but we can. So don't be tentative. Do put your questions and comments in. They'll really enrich our discussion after the speakers. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to our first speaker, Professor Tom Spencer from Geography here at the University of Cambridge, and he's going to kick us off. Over to you, Tom.
Thank you very much, Jess. Could we have the first slide, please? Okay, good evening, everybody, and it's great that you're all here, and we're really excited to tell you about this wonderful collection of aerial photography. So I'm Tom Spencer. I'm one of a team of 4 this evening, giving these brief presentations for you. And as Jess has said, we're going to talk about the Cambridge University Collection of Aerial Photography, QCAP, and what we're trying to do to preserve and make fully accessible this collection into the future. It's an absolutely remarkable collection. It contains almost 500,000 images. Some of them are vertical images, some are taken from an oblique angle, some are in black and white, some are in colour, and they cover the period between 1943 and 2009. And it includes some of the earliest colour aerial imagery ever taken, such as in this view of Corfe Castle, taken in August 1947. So we're going to talk about the origins and early history of the collection. We're going to talk about QCAP and archaeology, QCAP and the changing British environment, and then we'll finish up by saying something about digitizing the collection and the future visions that we have for it. So to get us started on the origin and early history, I'm going to hand over to Bob Bewley. So Bob, over to you. Next slide, please.
Thank you very much, Tom, and to Jess and everybody at Selwyn. And I can see the numbers unbelievably approaching 400 in this amazing Zoom meeting. So thank you all for coming. I'm surprised you haven't got something better to do on a Friday night, but very pleased that you're with us. Next slide, please. As has already been said, this is to celebrate the life and work of J.K.S. St. Joseph, and also to introduce his fantastic legacy. And the Second World War, that's how far back I'm going to take you initially. The Second World War probably ended more archaeological careers than it started. But for St. Joseph, who spent his war analysing the impact of the bombing by the RAF, particularly in Germany, by examining thousands of aerial photographs, it provided the foundation for St. Joseph's new career. He had trained originally as a geologist. He became what we might now call an aerial archaeologist, a term that was not in regular use then and is still not a common career. In 1945, he set up an aerial reconnaissance, a flying program, undertaking aerial photography flights looking for archaeological sites visible from the air. He used RAF pilots, of which there were many in 1945, and not surprisingly, they had little else to do. Many archaeologists were recruited as air photo interpreters during the Second World War, and the technique of air photography for archaeology had been developed in the interwar years, 1919 to 1939, especially by one OGS Crawford. Although, and you'll hear more about him later, although we have a handful of images from 1943, July 1945 saw the first flight of the embryonic unit that was to become Qcap. We always say that Qcap started in 1945, but it wasn't officially created until 1948. The first 3 years were probably done on a wing and a prayer, literally, using RAF pilots, and one of whom was Derek Reilly, an archaeologist before the war. He flew in 75 bombing missions, and this is all recorded in St. Joseph's daily log, beautifully written in his longhand script in pencil. And Derek was the pilot on that first flight. St. Joseph describes taking in Hadrian's Wall, and there was hardly any air traffic in those days, so they could fly anywhere they liked. And Derek and both St. Joseph must have thought they had the dream ticket, flying all over England with Dr. St. Joseph looking at archaeological sites from the air, and for once not having to dodge the bullets, flak, and enemy aircraft. Next slide, please. Or is it the next slide? Oh no, just sorry, go back one. Sorry, yeah, my mistake. From the early photographs, you'll notice that there are quite a few parts of the aircraft. You can see in this one, in the middle image here, that the wing is visible, and it's a picture of Bournemouth taken in June 1948. And this is because beggars couldn't be choosers. St. Joseph had to fly in any aircraft that was supplied, and these were predominantly low wing. Eventually, Qcap purchased a twin-engined high-wing Cessna, the 337 that you can see bottom right, which was an inspired choice as it provided an almost perfect platform for both oblique as well as aerial photography. The other point to note in the early photographs is that they are labelled Crown Copyright in recognition of the fact that the government, through the RAF, was essentially paying for the image capture and the copyright holder of the photography. And if we have time later in the question and answer, I've got a good anecdote about Crown Copyright in Buckingham Palace. As with any archaeological endeavour, there's an element of serendipity. And aerial archaeologists are always waiting for the hot, dry summers. 2018 is still fresh in our memories. St. Joseph was able to be in the right place at the right time for the hot, dry summers way back in 1947, 1949, and probably some of you will remember more likely to remember 1975 and 1976. But also in the mid-90s, there were dry summers too. Many, many crop mark sites, the length and breadth of the UK, were photographed for the first time by this pioneering work. Next slide, please. For me, a particular site stand out from the late 1940s. The one in particular is a Roman fort at Beckfoot on the Solway Plain, Cumbria. And then this image that you can hear, a possible Iron Age hill fort called Swarthy Hill, photographed in mid-July 1945, also on the Solway coast. Excavated by me as part of my PhD and dates to roughly 500 BC. And then we also found on that same thing was a D-shaped enclosure, which was visible as a crop mark, which helped me identify the Neolithic settlement pattern of the Solway Plain, Cumbria, at the beautifully named Plaskett lands. And that was part of my PhD research on prehistoric and Romano-British settlement of the Solway Plain. And without the collection, the QCAP collection, I just couldn't have done that research. Next slide, please. Roman archaeology was St. Joseph's particular speciality and interest. Chasing Romans was how we used to refer to his work, and especially in Scotland. We will hear more about that later when Professor Martin Millett gives his short talk. But St. Joseph's interest and support of archaeological research was much wider. He was involved in many publications with From the Air or Aerial Survey in their title, usually written with distinguished scholars and experts, such as you can see here, Medieval England and Aerial Survey, co-authored with Professor Maurice Beresford. St. Joseph edited The Uses of Air Photography in 1966, and his successor, David Wilson, wrote what I often refer to as the Bible for any wannabe aerial archaeologists, Air Photo Interpretation for Archaeologists. But if you haven't looked at Uses of Air Photography, I can thoroughly recommend it. And I was looking at mine earlier today that I see I picked up in Oxfam for £5.99 many, many years ago. So it is still available from various good booksellers. Next slide, please. So to conclude this section, St. Joseph's contribution for British as well as European archaeology and landscape studies was threefold. The creation of a unique and world-leading archive of aerial photographs now held by Cambridge University. The stimulus for the creation of the aerial reconnaissance team still in existence today in England, Historic England, in Scotland, the Historic Environment Service, and in Wales, the Royal Commission for Ancient and Historical Monuments, and more widely, and that's the right-hand side of this slide, at the ending of the Cold War, it was Britain that the archaeologists came to and said, you know about air photography, can you help us? And St. Joseph was the collection that he had and David Wilson were very helpful in that. And then finally in this part, the transformation in knowledge that his work brought about. And that cannot be underestimated. What the collection contains in terms of a record of past landscapes, and Tom will refer to this at the end, is absolutely remarkable. And then next slide, please. And this is my final slide, just to sort of continue the tradition of archaeological air photography. I was very lucky last November to be able to fly in Saudi Arabia, recording unique sites like this, a keyhole tomb, probably dating from the Neolithic or Bronze Age, at least 5,000 years old. And it's really through the training that I had when I was lucky enough to be doing an MPhil and then PhD at Cambridge. I was lucky enough to sit on the air photo interpretation courses that St. Joseph and David Wilson did. So we hope that through the project that you're hearing about tonight, that his legacy will live on and the photographs will be more publicly available. So thank you very much. And I now hand over to Professor Martin Millett.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us. What I want to do this evening is to tell you a little bit about the contribution that J.K. St. Joseph made to particularly Roman archaeology. Next slide, please. But before focusing on the Roman, I do want to make the point that air photography is undifferentiating in a sense of what it sees. And much of the work that was done between the 1950s and 1980s by St. Joseph contributed to a very broad understanding of British archaeology from the earliest of prehistory down to the early modern period. This is in many ways illustrated by these two images on the left-hand side, showing henges, Neolithic religious monuments, a type of monument that was known before the war, but one in which the discoveries by Qcap and J.K. St. Joseph really put into a new focus. changing completely our understanding of the distribution of those sites and providing brilliant evidence of the character and nature of them. And the other point that I think is important to appreciate about St. Joseph's work is that he was an absolutely prolific publisher. Unlike many archaeologists, he discovered massive amount of new information and made it public very quickly. So the images on the left of Neolithic monuments come from a paper in the journal Antiquity, where he published a series of reports on air photography. And those of you who've got sharp eyesight will see it comes from the 50th publication of recent results in air photography. Quite a considerable contribution then to communicating the results of this work to a very broad archaeological public as well as the broader public. Next slide, please. As well as shedding new light on types of sites that were already known, the development of air photography through the post-war period also made a phenomenal contribution in identifying new elements in the past landscape of Britain and identifying new types of site for the first time. Particularly relevant to my past history as an archaeologist are the discoveries that they made in the early medieval period. We're seeing here some of the first images of early medieval timber halls, those of the type that are known from the literature through Beowulf, but prior to discovery from the air by St. Joseph and others, these were unknown in the archaeological record. So the air photographic work wasn't just focusing on things that St. Joseph and others were interested in, it was communicating and broadening our understanding of the whole of the history of the British landscape. Next slide, please. But St. Joseph's passion, as Bob has already said, was for Roman archaeology. And in his book with Shepherd Freer, Roman Britain from the Air, we see some of the best results, both of his air photography and of air photography exploring Roman Britain. Some of this dealt with types of site that are probably familiar to many of you. For instance, a lot of work on Roman countryside and Roman villas, not only Roman villas, he also made a major contribution in mapping, for instance, villages and so forth, particularly in this part of the country. But what we're seeing on these two images are Roman villas showing up in the archaeological record through air photography in two different ways. On the left, we're seeing a villa at Lidgate in Suffolk, showing as a soil mark where the ploughing of the field is cutting into the walls of a building. And what's important here is that the air photography was taking place at the time that agriculture was changing and ploughing was going deeper. So if you went to Lidgate now, photograph this, you wouldn't see the walls of the building and the floors showing out crisply as they do on this image. Rather, you would see a spread of rubble from the destruction of the villa. So it was recording things that were now as they were being destroyed, such that they are the unique and invaluable image of that site. By contrast, on the right-hand side, we're seeing not a soil mark, but a result of the drought of 1976, where we can see the plan of the Roman villa showing crisply as the crop is coming towards harvest, ripening, and the areas over the walls have droughted out, so the plants are dying back, and the walls show up crisply again, revealing again the plan of one of the major villas of this part of England. Next slide, please. The other great contribution that was made by air photography was to look at the context of already known sites. So on this image, we're seeing the fort at on Hadrian's Wall at Housesteads, probably the best known of the forts on the Roman frontier. And we can see the Hadrian's Wall itself running from left to right across the screen with the fort attached to its southern side. But what I think is interesting about this image, taken in shadow, showing the earthworks in the middle of the winter, is the way in which air photography shows not just the Roman fort, but the context of the fort and the settlement around it. The settlement both of the Roman period that lies to the south, towards the bottom of the screen, down the slope, but also the development of medieval, post-medieval agricultural settlements to the left-hand side of the fort, to the west of the fort, that represent the development of the whole landscape. And this is where air photography really comes into its own, in showing the physical remains of the totality of past landscapes in different ways. But next slide, please. But the great passion that St. Joseph had, and the area where he made his biggest contribution, was not simply in recording archaeological sites, but in using that recording to write new histories of Roman Britain. And it was in the military sphere that this was his greatest contribution. The example I want to show you here is one of the big marching forts of Roman Scotland, Strathcrow in Angus here. And what we're seeing is the outline of the defences of the fort, a sort of playing card shape. And what I've outlined at the top is one of the gates, which is shown in the drawing beneath. And the distinctive form of that gate with its outturned entrance, St. Joseph recognised as a particular type, and he was able to map that type of fort against other types of fort to show the course of military campaigns. And this particular type of fort gate is exclusively dated to the period in the 80s AD, and therefore relates to Agricola's campaigns in Scotland. So in the upper map, St. Joseph's contribution is showing the route and the extent of Agricola's campaigns in Scotland towards the end of the 1st century AD. And by comparing that with other types of fort plan, he was able to map the distribution of the other major campaign in Roman Scotland in the early 3rd century under the Emperor Severus. And what this illustrates is how the collecting of this air photographic information and understanding it was not simply a process of, if you like, stamp collecting, but it was something that contributed analytically to our understanding of the development of Britain and contributed to the writing of the history of Roman Britain in unique and original ways. And with that, I will pass over to Tom, who's going to talk about the later contribution in the landscape.
Thank you very much, Martin. So I want to bring us really much more up to date now. Next slide, please. So we're now looking at changes in the 20th century. Qcap was the major contributor for the evidence of destruction of sites in the gravel areas of Britain, with the publication of this booklet, A Matter of Time, in 1960. And that was followed by English Heritage's Monuments at Risk survey between 1995 and 1998, which, again, using the Qcap photography, showed that since 1945, 48% of land with archaeological monuments revealed evidence of destruction of archaeological remains. And amongst these, 9% a pattern of total destruction, 39% of land a pattern of piecemeal destruction. And that report went on to look at the key causes of destruction, and those were identified as cultivation, natural processes, development and urbanization, mineral extraction, and road building. And of course, what happened to archaeological sites in this period reflects wider changes in the UK landscape. And it's remarkable that the period covered by the collection, the 1940s to 2010s, gives really an unprecedented window on the spatial impact of these changes. And what I'd like to do now is give a few examples from the collection, and I could have chosen many more, first from rural landscapes and then from urban centres of landscape change. Next slide, please. So if we start with the rural, the collection records the loss of lowland woodlands, of hedgerows, of heaths and wetlands. So on the left-hand slide here, we have Felsham Hall Woods in Suffolk, taken in May 1975. This is a coppiced woodland. So you've got beautiful examples of the different stages of coppicing in the bottom part of that image. But you can see that at the sort of, as you go up to the sort of top left, there's a great chunk taken out of the woodland by arable agriculture. And then if you look beyond that woodland boundary towards the top of that image, you've got open fields there, which were before 75 in the 1950s and 1960s were also woodland. So we're recording that kind of loss of lowland woodland. On the right-hand side, we've got two images from Madmarston Hill in Oxfordshire. In the first image from 1961, the central area there is under pasture, and you can see the hedgerows, the field boundaries there. And then in the second image from 1968, you can see the hedgerows have all been grubbed up. The pasture has been replaced by arable agriculture, and we're moving into those very large field sizes, of course, very characteristic of that much more industrialized agriculture that we start to see from the late 1960s. Next slide, please. We've also got a record of afforestation that's in both lowland areas and upland areas. So on the left-hand side, we have a very early image of afforestation in the Breckland, quite close to here, near Brandon from March 1955. It's just been planted up there in the left-hand image. And then in the right-hand image, we have from Rochester in the Cheviot Hills in July 1967, we can see an image of a monoculture of Sitka spruce. So we pick up these sorts of changes as well. Next slide, please. And then we also, rather dramatically, have evidence of the impact of extractive industries. And here I've just chosen an example of the Cornish china clay mining impacts on the Cornish landscape. So in 1910, Cornwall produced some 50% of all the world's china clay. Something like 1 million tons of china clay were taken out of the Southwest Peninsula around the beginning of the 20th century. And of course, that resulted in some very big, very deep holes. So here we've got the china clay pit at St Enda, photographed by St Joseph in June 1948. But for every ton of china clay, you get 5 tons of waste. So this created these really very sort of surreal landscapes. The Cornish Alps, these are just spoil heaps of china clay mining waste. And a beautiful image here from Carnsmerry in June 1949. 50 years after that, in 1999, the English China Clay Company was brought out by a French company, and they switched production to Brazil. And the Cornish industry completely collapsed, and the activities and these landscapes were largely abandoned at that time. Of course, some of these sites have been repurposed since that time, and I guess the most well-known of those is the Eden project near St Austell, which opened in 2000. Next slide, please. The collection also records a record of industrial activity, of deindustrialization, and again, in some cases, of regeneration. So here's just one example of that. The slide on the left is the East Greenwich Gasworks, the Greenwich Peninsula, in May 1972. The gasworks originally produced town gas from imported coal. So you can see the sort of jetties where the coal was brought up the Thames estuary to Greenwich for this process. You can see also the two gas holders here in the center of the image. At the time, these were among the largest gas holders in the world. But you can see that this was also an incredible industrial complex, an enormous industrial complex. When North Sea gas came on stream in 1976, or from 1976, the plant became obsolete. And so it led to a shutdown of operations and the clearance of the site, and then, of course, a massive decontamination program to get rid of decades of coal tar, benzene, and other hydrocarbons. So you can see in the central image from October 1980, the clearance of the Greenwich Peninsula being sort of well underway. And then ultimately, of course, if we have a similar kind of view, now not from an aircraft, but from one of the towers on Canary Wharf, looking across to that site, of course, we can see what was the Millennium Dome, which we now think of as the O2 Arena. So an example there of regeneration of that landscape from 1972 through 1980 to 2000. Next slide, please. And then the last example of this kind of large-scale landscape change that I want to look at, which is captured by the collection, is the impact of the transport revolution. And really how this here particularly relates to the rise in post-war private car ownership. I think arguably the most liberating, but at the same time, one of the most destructive changes in the UK landscape of the 20th century. And here are a couple of examples. On the left-hand side, the Gravelly Hill interchange, photographed here in 1978. Of course, we call it Spaghetti Junction, which was completed in 1972. And then the construction on the right-hand side, what was at the time known as the London Orbital, one of the many orbitals that were suggested in the sort of post-war planning period. Of course, this now we think of it, or now we know it as the M25. And here's the construction of the Thurrock interchange from June 1978. Next slide, please. Now, of course, not all the landscape change in the period covered by the collection was driven by human dynamics. There are also natural changes in the landscape, which the collection captures, and they're captured particularly well on low-lying erosive coasts. So here's one particular example, the aerial view here, which is a modern view taken by aerial photographer called Mike Page, is of Scoldhead Island on the Barrier Island coast of North Norfolk. This coast and these islands are quite fragile, but they are generally quite static for most of the time. But every now and then they're impacted by high water levels and wave action associated with North Sea storm surges. The most famous of those is the 1953 storm surge, but there was a major storm surge on the 11th of January 1978. And here on the right-hand side, we have a pre-storm surge image from this coast from the 7th of August 1967. And then immediately after this surge, on the 20th of January, Qcap went out and they flew this bit of coast again for us. And basically this was ringing up David Wilson in Qcap and saying, can you possibly fly Scoldhead Island for us? And he'd say, yes, I'll see what I can do. I can probably tack that job onto another job that I'm doing. And here you can see the change from the pre-surge to the post-surge. This shoreline retreated by 20 meters here, and the beach was actually rolled over on top of the marshes in these big fans of sand and gravel. And that's one of the great things about the collection. We've got this repeat photography. We can capture these kinds of events. So I hope that the three presentations that we've given you here give you some kind of flavor of the riches of the collection. Now we're going to say a little bit about what we're trying to do to preserve it and make it accessible for future generations. So I'd now like to hand over to Hugh Jones.
Thank you, Tom. Next slide, please. So yes, I'm Hugh Jones and I'm the head of Cambridge Digital Library. Cambridge Digital Library is the university's platform for collection-based digital humanities. So essentially, I suppose, research about stuff, you might say, broadly speaking. It holds some 35,000 items and over 500,000 images. And in a nutshell, we take very, very high resolution archival images of heritage materials and then work with researchers like Tom, Martin and Bob to put them online for everybody to see and interact with. Now, as the others will tell you, the other guys have all been down to the studio. The digitization itself takes place in a very dark room in the furthest reaches of the university library. There's no light, there are bars on the windows, and it's very, very difficult to find. And it's somewhat ironic that this process then, which happens in this seemingly very secretive way, then provides a free and accessible window onto some of the most extraordinary collections in the university, and collections which people otherwise wouldn't be able to see, would be locked away. And in a pilot project launched in February 2019, so just over 2 years ago, we digitized just a small portion of the Qcap archive, 1,500 images, and put it on the platform for everyone to see. And you can see that now. Next slide, please. Now, when people hear the term heritage materials, I think they often, the image which comes to mind is ancient manuscripts or the papers of people like Isaac Newton and Charles Darwin. Now, we certainly deal with a lot of that kind of material, but increasingly we're also imaging and putting online modern collections. So photographs, slides, negatives, and even VHS. Somewhat counterintuitively, from a conservation viewpoint, these modern materials are often in much more danger of deterioration and loss than the ancient collections. A medieval manuscript's been around, for 600 years, 700 years, and they tend to be in a fairly stable state. Not the case with photographs and negatives. And we have also observed, because we spend a lot of our time putting things online, that photographic archives have a huge appeal. And that's both within and outside research. They're very easy to engage with. You don't need any specialist skills, any specialist language skills to engage with an image in the way that you might do to engage with a manuscript in Greek or Latin. And in particular, it turns out that aerial photography is very, very popular. So when we launched just the 1,500 of them in 2019, it led to a massive demand and some panic because it essentially nearly blew up our servers. We all had to scurry in to shovel in more coal into the engines. And over the last 2 years, that use has been consistently high. So we've had just on that 1,500 images, we've had in 2 years, we've had 400,000 views online. Now, in terms of our processes, it's meticulous, it's driven by care for the materials. In some ways, it's an expensive process. It needs to be because of the outputs we require. Each of the 100 million pixel digital cameras shown in the last slide costs about £35,000. And the process takes place in a very carefully controlled technical environment. And the reason for that is because we want to, in a sense, we want to produce images for people to look at, and that's certainly important, but we also want images which can work as a data set. So images which can work as research tools, as the basis for research, and work as the base for analysis as well. And I'll talk about that a bit more in a moment. So we take these massive images and we put them online for free. There's no paywall, there's no login. They're huge zoomable images. Sometimes, as in this example, there are several images stitched together to create even larger images alongside then descriptive metadata, so the products of research, which allows you to search them, allows you to identify them. And one of the things about very high resolution images is that sheer resolution sometimes, well, often is a research tool in itself, in that you can often see more in the image than you can in the original item. So there's a kind of microscope effect, which makes the image, as I said, a research tool. Next slide. And in this image of Corfe Castle, just to go back to Corfe Castle for a moment. So this is the zoomed out image, but next slide, please. If we zoom in, you can see that, and I'll tell you how to have a play with this yourself in a moment, how the sheer resolution of the images allows you to investigate it in this kind of analytic way. If you want to have a look at the images yourself, if you Google after this presentation, please don't leave us now, Cambridge Digital Library. The aerial photography collection actually has pride of place. It's right in the top left. It's the first collection, even above Isaac Newton and Charles Darwin. If you click on there, you'll be able to explore all of those 1,500 images. Next slide, please. Now, in terms of future developments, the most important, of course, is the addition of new material. At the moment, we've imaged 1,500 of 500,000 images in the whole collection. So there's a huge amount still to come. But we're also interested in alternative representations of the collection by time, by date, by theme, by location, and allowing different ways to navigate and analyze the material. And we're also interested in aggregating with other collections, the most obvious being other collections of aerial photography, but also perhaps with historical map collections, of which we have many online, with collections of archaeological or environmental reports. Just as an example, last week or the week before on Twitter, there was a lot of activity, a lot of interest around a hill fort, which was mentioned in the notebooks of Cambridge botanist Oliver Rackham, which are online. And then that same hill fort appears in the QCAP archive. So you can already see that these very different collections, in a sense, are casting light and feeding into each other. And finally, as I said, we're interested in images as data, how we might find automated ways to compare images to show change over time, how we might overlay collections of images onto maps, how we might integrate with archaeological or environmental data sets to provide new views onto the data, or in the future, even how we might use some kind of 3D visualizations to allow us to kind of fly through the landscapes of the past, recreating those original flights. And to talk more about how some of these things might be achieved, I'll just now hand back to Tom.
Thank you very much, Hugh. So just to wrap up here, I hope we've been able to demonstrate that this is a untapped, underused archive. It's an archive of enormous potential in the ways that Hugh has just described. And it represents a record of 60 years of very rapid landscape change, perhaps the greatest change in the nature of Britain since the 1830s and 1840s. So what can we learn from all this? Well, nothing if we don't make it accessible through a program of digitizing the photographs, so that through the University Library, they're made available to anyone, anywhere in the world to study. And to do this, we obviously need to raise a pretty substantial sum of money. We have a pretty good idea of what that would cost to digitize the whole collection from the trial that we've done with the 1,500 images. We think we're looking at least £3 million to do all 500,000 images. We're working on an application to the National Heritage Lottery Fund to fund this, but of course we need to generate some matching funding to go alongside that, and we're actively looking at where that matching funding might come from. We hope you found this a really useful and interesting presentation. We'll be very happy to share news on how we get on with you as Selwyn alumni. And we're very keen to discuss the project, what we can do, what we might do in the future with any of you. So thank you very much indeed. And I'm now going to hand back to our chair, Jessica Gardner.
Thank you so much, Tom, Bob, Hugh and Martin. I wish you could hear us clapping. You know, that's the sad thing about this, is you can't hear us celebrating in the background. Just a wonderful presentation. Thank you so much. Although I'd heard some of that before, it was really enlightening, and such a pleasure to see those images again. We've got so many questions. I want to start with actually a couple of comments that came in very early on, which I think are really telling. David Watson said, "Thank you for starting with a picture of Corfe Castle, as he's sitting 300 yards from it. So delighted that Hugh then came back to it." And Gordon Hannah, who says, as a civil engineer working on sea defence in North Norfolk in 1975, that he used the aerial photographs from Cambridge along with other aerial photographs to help with that defence plan. And I think both of those kind of immediate reactions within seconds of you starting speak to the power and fascination of this material for personal, professional and applied purposes. And I wonder if I could just use Chair's privilege to ask you, in just each of you in kind of a couple of words, why this fascinates us so much. There's something about that aerial view, isn't there? Why is it? Can I come to you, Tom? Just a couple of words.
Well, I mean, as a coastal person, I'm very interested in, and my title is Professor of Coastal Dynamics, so it absolutely maps onto my interests perfectly. And we've got this, incredible historical record here. The sort of coast, a lot of these coastlines don't change very much, so you need to look at them for quite a long time period. If you do that, you can capture that sort of change. And aerial photographs, I think in the chat something about, how does it compare to satellites? People tend to think aerial photographs are old hat, but actually there's a huge amount of information in them, which is quite remarkable.
Thank you. Bob, what about you? Why do these fascinate?
I wish I knew. I've been sitting in aeroplanes since I was about 10 years old, when my very young uncle, who was only 7 years older than me, was learning to fly and scared the living daylights out of us. But I was very interested from an early age of archaeology, and just being able to see the landscape in its context was one. But actually, all archaeologists like to discover things. And although it's a very patient discipline, the great thing about air photography, as was mentioned earlier, that it doesn't distinguish date. You can see so much of so many things so quickly, and that's partly why I get so excited, whether you're in the air or looking at an air photograph. And it's the excitement of being able to see it, and that's what it is, which is why Google Earth is such a big success.
That we're going to come back to some of that. I know some of the questions are about technical aspects of photography, and we'll come back to that in a minute. Martin and Hugh, just a couple of words from you on why this fascinates.
Well, for me, the landscape is like a sort of manuscript, and I'm interested in human power interactions in the past, but that's inscribed across the whole landscape. Archaeology is not about individual sites, it's about how people used their world.
That's lovely. And Hugh?
I don't really know, I'm not an expert, but I can tell you I've spent many, many hours looking at this collection, which isn't true of all the collections we put up in the library. So that's my experience as a layman.
No, thank you so much. I'm not expecting anyone to be an absolute technical expert on the photography, but I wonder who's best placed. I don't know if Tom or Bob might be to kick off in giving. Thank you, Bob. In terms of kind of giving us some understanding of the technology involved. I'll just give you a sort of taste of the questions that people were asking about this. When a photograph is taken from the air, what's the optimum position for the camera?
Yeah,
are they taken through glass? Those kind of things.
Yeah. I've saw those questions, and one of them was about, in terms of have they been post-processed? No. Can the naked eye see them? Yes. There are ways in which you can improve that, but basically it is light, the human eye, and a camera. And if you think back to the Cessna I showed, that was able to have a vertically mounted camera, which is obviously taking the overlapping pairs for stereo photography for analysis on the ground. But it also had a window that opened so that as you orbit a site, and you're orbiting because the sun is in the same position, and there are some lighting that is better from, say, into the sun, sometimes it's down sun, it just depends on the particular conditions. So it is an interpretive process while you're in the air, orbiting a site, saying, I'm going to take the picture now. And there was a question too about, are there photographs in the collection of sites in snow? And the answer is yes, there are. I suspect, but I'm not sure, that picture of Housesteads was in snow, but often in black and white, if it's printed in a particular way, you can't tell. I might be completely wrong, but I know there are pictures that were taken in snow, absolutely. And best not to photograph through perspex or glass. When you've just paid thousands of pounds for a camera, why would you put another cheap bit of glass in front of it? But with the window open, it can get very cold and very windy, but that was the best way of doing it. And those simple methods are still in use today, because there is no substitute what anybody can tell you for the human eye and the interaction. And so it is an interpretive process, and I think it's important to remember that.
Bob, are you telling me that people, because this is one of the questions, were people actually leaning out through the window to take these photographs then?
You don't lean out, because if you're, say, orbiting at 50, 60, 70, even sometimes 100 miles an hour, you don't want that wind on the camera. So you can just hold back slightly, and so you're not in the slipstream, but you're taking it with the window open. And we've just, funnily enough, there's a fantastic, worth looking up, this guy called Alfred Buckham. He was a photographer from about the 1920s. He used to stand in an open cockpit with his foot tied to some bit of the thing so he wasn't blown out, with an old camera with bellows on, taking pictures. His photographs are stunning, but it's slightly more comfortable now.
That's fantastic. And my thanks to Michael Rosner, Colin Humphreys and Janet O'Sullivan, who asked that first round of technical questions. There were so many. There's a couple of about heritage applications. And I guess Tom and Martin would be well placed to perhaps comment on these. One of them stimulated, as we can all understand, by those wonderful pictures at Lydgate of the Roman fort, and a question of, what responsibility do landowners have or did have about the preservation of that, or is it that these aerial photographs are what remains? Martin.
In this country, archaeological sites are only protected if particular action has been taken to protect them under the ancient monuments legislation. So a site like that, if it's farmers on a farmer's land, the farm almost certainly doesn't know about it. And they will just plough as they are allowed to. Now, air photography contributes to the decision on which sites are to be protected under legislation, but other sites are just being eroded, as with the rest of the landscape, as Tom has shown us, in all kinds of different ways. So that it's sad, but it's the way the modern world works.
Another reason why these photographs matter, though, Bob.
Absolutely, they are the site like that is the best evidence we have for that site, which has now been eroded.
Yeah, compelling case, Bob.
Thanks, Chair. If I could just add in, I was also, for years, I was an inspector of ancient monuments, and then when I moved to air photography, I always show pictures of sites where they've been ploughed. Because I saw this come in, I Googled Lydgate. It is a scheduled ancient monument, but the 1979 Ancient Monument and Archaeological Areas Act, sorry about that, says that if a site has been ploughed before it was scheduled, it can still be ploughed afterwards. And that was a compromise that was done at the last minute because of certain landowning people who said, oh, no, it's my land, I've got to be allowed to plough it. How, excuse my French, how bloody stupid is that? If it's worth protecting, it's worth protecting, and they should stop ploughing it. But that's the law.
Thank you, Bob. I would like to thank Katie Perez for that, and also to acknowledge Hannah Kirby. Fantastic question about how sites change through time, which Tom spoke to in terms of the natural environment so eloquently, Tom. I mean, is that one of the particular features of this set in terms of its importance to research and teaching?
Absolutely. I mean, when you have an eroding coast, that the erosion removes that evidence, and if you've got old photographs, then you can start to work out where the coastline was, for example, in the past. That actually becomes very important when you become interested in things like sea level rise and how the coastline may change in the future. If you've got old aerial photographs, you can actually look at sort of baseline conditions before sea level started to accelerate. So in an analytical sense, the collection is extremely valuable for looking at some locations where there is a number of years of repeat photography. You can work out the sort of rates of change before things, start to get nasty as we go through the rest of this century. So it's valuable, incredibly valuable.
There were quite a few comments and questions about specific areas of coverage, and we'll certainly see if we can pick those up for colleagues and friends who are watching this in answers. But I think it does speak to that point that Tom's going, those different landscapes, and the coverage is very wide, isn't it, across the UK? I wonder if you can give us a reminder of how many times was one site photographed? What was the regularity of the process?
Bob, you'll know that.
Shall I? It's almost impossible to say, but some sites went back to over and over again. Often, I mean, in Chasing Romans, St. Joseph photographed a lot. We found a site in 1993 when I was working up in the north of England, and I went back to the Cambridge collection to see whether St. Joseph had orbited, to see whether there might have been a fort there, and he did take some pictures near it. But it was a question of going back in the right conditions, or when they knew something had changed. So some will go once, and that's the other thing. Sometimes these sites, there's only one photograph that ever shows it. So it is that whole business of serendipity, which I think was mentioned earlier on, and taking that opportunity. And what a shame that we don't have a flying program in any university in the United Kingdom. Cambridge, you missed a trick there.
I'm going to come to Hugh now, if I might, before we close. We've got just a couple of more questions, and then we'll let everyone go and have a lovely Friday night. Hugh, there's some questions about could the whole of this be used as a data set to mine, and if it was digitized, are there opportunities to use it in different ways as a data set itself? And what does the what do the techniques that you're applying add to the collection as a whole?
So yes, I think that the whole of the data set would be available for analysis as data, so to feed into image recognition or kind of analysis, or even kind of artificial intelligence learning, AI techniques. And that's very much facilitated by the presentation on the digital library, because the digital library in essence is an interface which you can interact with as a person, and you can look and you can zoom, but all of those images are also available programmatically by a technology called IIIF, which is, it's very difficult to say, International Image Interoperability Framework. And that is, it's a means where, in a simple sense, all of the images can be hoovered up in a very lightweight way into any process you want to run on them. So, and the second thing, I suppose, that the technique of the photography, because it's such high resolution, does then allow for all kinds of different analysis and investigation. So there's a kind of practical thing to do with the resolution. But then the way we put them online alongside the metadata allows then what's in the image to be analysed alongside what we know about it. And those two things interact in interesting ways over time. So if somebody, for instance, runs an analysis and generates lots of information, that can then be put into the description, into the metadata, which then will lead to further analysis, which allows more to be found. So there's a kind of interesting cycle between the research and the object. One of the interesting things about this, I think, which comes up as this happens, is when then two people disagree about something.
Thank you.
Which they do on at a great regularity.
I am very conscious that we are pretty much on time. I feel that we could go on, and the questions are still coming in, which is a real testament. One of someone who says her great grandfather was J.K.S, which is absolutely wonderful to know that she is on the line, and she wonders what he would have made of Google Maps. I hope that we have done him justice in this. I really do, and there will be more information coming to everyone who's attended this, because I know that our panelists have very kindly said they'll have a look at the questions so they can come forward with more information. And I think that will also kind of answer the questions of where next in terms of funding, how that might go forward. We're at the start of that process, but I hope the attendance here shows why it matters. It really does. And this has been a great opportunity to share that with the Selwyn audience. So I think we should say thank you to Professor J.K. Joseph for his astonishing legacy that we're building on. And thank you to Tom Spencer, to Bob Bewley, to Martin Millett, and to Hugh Jones. And thank you to Selwyn College. We will be in touch, but this has been before Google Earth, and it's been a great event. My thanks to everyone, and we'll see you soon.